Welcome to the Antiquities Travel Guide. Follow us to different countries as we search for ancient artifacts. If you too wish to explore the ancient past through travel, we'll help you plan where to go, what to see, and how to best enjoy what you encounter. In this series of the ATG, you can accompany Mariza and me on our trek through England, homeland of the ancient Angles, Saxons, Romans, and Celtic Britons. Come on, let's go! Mariza and I woke up in Shanklin on the beautiful Isle of Wight and decided to grab some breakfast at a local eatery called Blueberries, right near the water. The Romans called this island Vectis, and its inhabitants Vectensians. Later on, when the Latin V became pronounced like a W, the name of the island became Wicht, and then Wight. After we ate, it was a short drive to Brading to visit the ruins of a Roman villa. This side of the island had good grazing land for cattle, and there was a harbor nearby, so that is what attracted people to the area, including the cultured farmer and administrator who built this villa.
So we're here at the Brading Roman Villa on the Isle of Wight, formerly known as Vectis. What's cool about this site is that they have some pretty well-preserved mosaics. Excavation started here in 1880 and has continued to the present day.
The remains of the villa are in 3 sections: the North Range, the South Range, and the West Range. These were not all occupied at the same time. The South Range came first. It was lived in for about 100 years, from the late 1st to the late 2nd century. Then came the more grand North Range, and finally, after a disastrous fire in the 4th century, the West Range was built. It is the most impressive section, and is protected by a modern building. Here is the famous Orpheus Mosaic. Orpheus plays his lyre and tames the wild beasts. He's a god that represented resurrection and the triumph of good over evil. Villa owners like to impress their guests with their choice and arrangement of mosaics. They probably were the subject of conversation, much like people like to talk about the significance of their tattoos. This mosaic is right in the front entrance to the villa, so this must have been an important image for the owner. Was he a worshipper of Orpheus? Or did he think of himself as like Orpheus? Don't know. This is the audience chamber. Medusa is in the center of the mosaic. She's surrounded by the 4 seasons. The image of Ceres teaching Triptolemus to plow represents the spring. Achilles frightening a girl when he reveals himself as a man, that represents the summer. Mad King Lycurgus with his double-headed axe chasing Ambrosia, who's turned into a vine by the gods to protect her. That represents the autumn. Attis receiving water for his sheep represents the winter. In the triangles, the 4 winds with their conch shells trumpet the changing of the seasons. The outer border depicts the sea, showing the villa's maritime interests. Note the merman on it. He's carrying a steering oar and a bowl of oysters. You can also see a Triton carrying a shepherd's crook. Holding these elements basically shows that you're in control of the sea. Here's a mosaic depicting the god Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, the theater, and fertility. The room may have been used for worship, and the plinth may have once had an altar on it. What's with the guy with the rooster head? It appears to be a caricature of Constantius Gallus, Caesar of the eastern part of the empire from 351 to 354. The name Gallus can mean rooster, so that's probably why he has a rooster head. Gallus wasn't very popular, so the owner of the house is singling him out for ridicule. He's wearing the outfit worn by a venator. A venator is someone who hunted animals in the arena as a form of entertainment. Venatio, you see, that's the Latin word for hunting that was popular in the amphitheaters, where a man would hunt and then kill wild animals. Now, were all the animals ferocious? No. I mean, some were. They had lions or bears, tigers, crocodiles, leopards, boars, hippopotamuses, elephants. But sometimes it would be like dogs or goats or deer or rabbits. And sometimes the animals did tricks and weren't killed. One animal that you didn't see would be wolves. Yeah, the Romans don't seem to have liked to kill wolves. It may have something to do with the myth about the she-wolf who raised Romulus and Remus. Here's a fox next to a domed temple. This is the only mosaic in Britain that shows a Roman building. Yeah. Here are the remains of a nymphaeum. We talked about those in our previous episode. As time passed, when the Romans were finding it more difficult to defend their frontiers, this island became susceptible to seaborne attacks. In 367, there was a barbarian attack on the island. Villa owners began to move into walled towns for protection. By that time, this villa was in a sorry state. A poorer farming family probably took up residence here, because part of the villa was turned into workshops. It was eventually abandoned altogether. After braiding, we then made our way back to the mainland, looking for Portchester Castle, so we took a ferry over to Portsmouth. Now you may say, wait a minute, Portchester Castle isn't ancient, it's medieval, isn't it? What are you going there for? You're an ancient historian. Well, you see, the castle has had a very long history. Yeah, much of it that remains is from the medieval period, but it started as a Roman fort. And that was a good enough reason for me to go.
Here we are at the southern wall of the castle, which best preserves the Roman section of the structure. We don't know exactly when the Romans built the fort, but the oldest Roman coins here date to the mid-3rd century, which would place it right around the time that the Roman general Marcus Aurelius Caurasius was sent here to rid the English Channel of threat by Frankish and Saxon pirates.
The fort was probably abandoned sometime before the end of Roman rule in Britain. Then, around 500, the Saxons landed here and took over. They called any Roman fort a chester, and this one Portus Chester, the fort at the port. Eventually, Portus Chester got corrupted to Portchester. The Saxons built a village at Portchester. They also erected some buildings within the old Roman fort. In the 10th century, King Edward the Elder repaired the fort. The castle within the walls was built during the reign of King Henry I in 1120. Not far from Portchester are the remains of a 1st century Roman palace that we just had to check out. Discovered accidentally by a worker laying water pipe in 1960, it turned out to be the largest single building ever discovered in Britain. In size, it's approximately equivalent to Nero's Golden House in Rome. It's larger in size than Buckingham Palace.
So we're here at Fishbourne Roman Palace. Originally built in the 1st century as a villa, it was later expanded in that century into a full-blown palace. What's amazing about this site is that it contains a large collection of mosaics, some of which are almost entirely intact.
The palace was built somewhere between 80 and 90 CE and belonged to Tiberius Claudius Cogidubnus. Although his name sounds Roman, he was, in fact, a Celtic Briton of the Regni tribe, also known as the Regnenses. He was a firm supporter of the Romans, and for his aid to them was granted Roman citizenship. That's when he got his Roman name. The Regnenses, you see, had been on the Roman side for some time. A generation earlier, Cogidubnus' predecessor, King Verica, had requested help from the Romans in his war against the Catuvallani, which they gave him. And so, when the Romans invaded Britain in 43 CE, Verica assisted them. So, the Regnenses were rewarded. The owner of this palace, Cogidubnus, ruled as a client king of Rome. There's a possibility that he even was given the rank of legatus, which was a high-ranking officer in the Roman army that commanded a legion. After his death, his kingdom was incorporated into Roman provincial territory and ruled by Rome directly. There were 160 stone columns in the palace, and 50 different mosaic floors, which were laid by imported craftsmen. I wouldn't be surprised if a top architect was brought in from Rome to design this place. If you were a visitor to the palace, as you approached the east entrance, you would walk through a garden leading to the reception hall. From the entrance hall, they went into another garden with shrubs along the side of a very wide path. There's a formal garden here today. It's been carefully cultivated according to its original plan, with box hedging, staked fruit trees, beautiful pergolas with vines growing over them, covered walkways. They've also got a recreated triclinium, which is an outdoor eating place. Now, the original garden would have had fountains placed next to all the paths, and they would have been fed by lead pipes carrying water from a spring outside the grounds here. A recreated vegetable and herb garden is also here, which includes plants they used to use in cooking and in medicine and in dyeing their clothes. The guest hall was reached by ascending a flight of stone steps and entering through a 40-foot-high porch graced by 4 carved columns. Inside was the audience chamber where the guests were received. The ceiling would have been painted in red, purple, and blue. And then around this chamber were these exquisitely furnished suites. But it's the north wing that's now preserved inside the modern building, and inside that you can see the uncovered floor mosaics. There were 2 courtyards flanked by guest rooms in the north wing. There are suspended walkways that you can walk on and see each of the floors. No expense was spared in the building of this palace. They imported 2 kinds of marble from Turkey, 2 kinds of marble from Italy, brown breccia and green marble from Greece, limestone and green and white marble from France, and quartz from Guernsey. Imagine how expensive that must have been. Look at this stunning mosaic, the largest and best preserved here. At the center, you can see Cupid riding a dolphin, surrounded by a plated rope border. And that in turn is surrounded by what at first looks like seahorses, but these are depictions of a mythological creature called a hippocampus, which has the head and body of a horse, the coiled tail of a sea serpent, and wings. In mythology, these creatures accompanied the god Neptune. You can also see 4 wine jugs in the mosaic. Archaeologists found lots of roof tiles. Some of them bear footprints from animals and children who probably were wandering around the place when the tiles were being made. To the northeast was an 80-foot-long assembly hall divided by 8 colossal piers. The most stunning part of the palace would have been the south wing, which was next to the bathhouse and was probably where the owner and his family lived. It was between 2 patios and had a beautiful view of the gardens and overlooked the harbor. That's probably where he kept his boats. In the east wing were 2 more courtyards with 10 rooms. But that part of the palace had a simpler design, so we think that's maybe where the servants lived. There's a museum gallery here, which displays quite a range of Roman objects that were found during the excavations. Things like beautiful jewelry and personal items. There's a sculptured marble head that people think is an image of Emperor Nero when he was a child. There are things like locks and keys, bits and pieces of clothing, pottery, roof tiles, gaming dice, and also a plaster cast of a small spiral section of Trajan's column, the original, of course, coming from about 100 CE. This section shows the Roman galleys crossing over the river Danube. That was a full fun day, and sadly, we have only 1 day of our trip left. In our next episode, we'll be exploring the ruins of 2 more Roman villas, Bignor and Lullingstone, and then visiting the historic city of Canterbury. Please subscribe and ding the bell to be notified when that video is released. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.